Hi there, my name is Geoff. I'm a photographer. I also teach adult education classes as well as one-to-ones and specific group workshops. This is the second of 5 films that I've produced as a basic introduction to photography. 3 of them deal with the elements of exposure, ISO, shutter speed and aperture. The other 2 films deal with RAW versus JPEG and autofocus. Shutter speed is literally how long the shutter is open for recording an image. Ideally, we want to take you off auto and get you shooting manual. That way you have control over your photographs. Shutter speed is measured in fractions of seconds. So for example, a 30th of a second will let in twice as much light as a 60th of a second. But you need to have an understanding of what shutter speed is doing. In automatic, your camera will never shoot slower than a 60th of a second because it always believes you're holding it. If there's not much light around, the flash will come on, which is probably not what you're after. Shutter speed, like ISO and aperture, control how much light comes into the camera. But shutter speed's other job is to control and record movement. My old film camera had about 12 different shutter speeds. You'll notice with your digital camera it will have upwards of 50 shutter speed options. With my film camera, those shutter speed numbers doubled or halved, letting in twice or half as much light. With a digital camera, the sensor is much more sensitive to light, so consequently those increments now go up and down in thirds. So 3 clicks of your wheel is doubling or halving. Once you have control over shutter speed, you can either freeze movement or you can show movement, depending on the subject. In this simple experiment, I've taken 3 photographs to highlight shutter speed. In the first photograph, you can see that the background is static and the car is static. I've taken this photograph at a fast shutter speed, 500th of a second. In this second photograph, I've slowed the shutter speed down. I've kept the camera still, so the background is static, but now the car is blurred. This photograph was taken at 100th of a second. With the third photograph, I've also taken this at 100th of a second, but this time I've tracked the car, taking the photograph as I move through the shot. This way, the car is static, but the background is blurred. This technique is called panning. If you want to use really slow shutter speeds to show movement, ideally you'd need a tripod. Take a look at these photographs. To keep them uniform, I shot all of them on a tripod. The fast shutter speeds, 500th, 250th of a second, you can see that the water is frozen in motion. But at slow shutter speeds, a quarter, a half and 1 second, you can see that the water takes on a different quality. You can only shoot these kind of images once you get yourself out of auto and into manual. However, you'll need to remember that shooting at slow shutter speeds, handheld, will result in camera shake. To keep my exposure uniform, if I alter one element of exposure, in this case shutter speed, I'm going to need to alter another element, either aperture or ISO. In this example, I've altered my aperture. Most modern digital cameras will have the ability to take an exposure of up to 30 seconds, and they'll also have something called a bulb setting. The bulb setting enables you to take photographs for longer than 30 seconds, minutes or even hours. It completely depends on what you're taking photographs of. If you want to freeze the motion, ideally you use fast shutter speeds, but it depends how fast that thing is moving. If I'm running, maybe 100th of a second will do it. If it's Usain Bolt, it might have to be a little bit quicker than that. En route to manual, you might want to practice with something called shutter priority, which is an S with a Nikon and derivative cameras, or TV with most Canons. This means that you select the shutter speed and the camera will do the aperture and the ISO. It gives you a good understanding of how shutter speed works and helps you move towards shooting in manual. Shooting in shutter priority is a good learning curve, but remember, it's still an automatic setting. Using shutter speed can help to make your images more creative. So that was shutter speed, the second element of exposure. Watch out for the next film on aperture. Remember, shooting at